Welcome to Home with the Hudsons. Today I'm going to be going over how I refinished my antique sink. When I learned that my kitchen needed to be gutted and redone, I decided to let my mind run wild with possibilities and thought maybe I could have my kitchen sink. So I learned how to refinish it myself, and now I want to go over the process with you. I wanted to go over the tools I'm using to refinish the antique sink. As you can see, I've already gotten started on getting a lot of the rust off of the bottom of it. That's why some of it is more white, but I'll go through the tools I've used to do that so far. So I've got gloves to protect my hands, a mask. This is really important with getting all of the rust off. The rust flies everywhere and will get into your airway, so you want a mask. Goggles to protect my eyes from the rust flying everywhere. I've used a couple of wire brushes to get some of the rust off by hand. And then I've also got a drill with a wire brush attachment, and that gets some of the more stuck on rust off easily. I've got knee pads. As you can see, I'm doing this on the ground. This isn't necessary if your sink is up on a table. And then I've also used some Rust-Oleum gel to get some of the rust off, and that's helped a lot. That's why it's a little bit more white. So if you have more stuck on rust, something like this can be really helpful. And here is a better close-up of all of the things I used to refinish the back of the sink. I will also have links to these things in my Amazon storefront. And here is a view of the before for the back of the sink. So the first thing with removing the rust from the back of the sink is getting all of the bigger chunks of surface rust off. And then you can go in with the Rust-Oleum gel or a similar substance to kind of get into the metal more and get a lot of that rust off. And then after you wipe off the Rust-Oleum gel, you can go in more with the wire brushes and the drill with the wire brush attachment and get into all the nooks and crannies to get as much rust out as possible. It's not really about looking pretty on the back of the sink, it's just so that the rust doesn't continue to happen and there isn't as much opportunity for rust going forward. I also vacuumed up using my shop vac all of the rust in between passes so that it would be nice and clean for the next steps. Okay, now that the sink is sanded, all the rust is off, and I vacuumed up all of the dust from the rust with my shop vac, I'm going to go ahead and clean it and paint it with Rust-Oleum paint to seal it and prevent any residual rust from furthering on the sink. So I'm going to start with cleaning it with a rag in this denatured alcohol. Then I'm going to go over that with a Rust-Oleum primer. And then the final top coat, I chose a gray, will be this satin protective enamel Rust-Oleum spray paint. Of course, nobody's going to see the bottom of the sink, so it doesn't really matter what color it's painted. This is just a protective layer so that the sink will continue to be wonderful for many years to come. It started looking so much better immediately when I got to do the priming. It's looking so much better than the actual rusty bottom of the sink. And before I got to priming the middle section of the sink, I made sure to cover the drain hole with tape. That way I wouldn't get the paint in that part of the sink. So at this point, I have cleaned it once with the denatured alcohol and primed it with the Rust-Oleum primer. And this is how it looks with the primer on it. And after this, I cleaned it again with denatured alcohol and put the gray enamel coating on it. For a sink this size, you're going to want 2 to 3 cans of both the Rust-Oleum primer and the actual paint. I did put 2 coats of the paint on, which took a little bit more. I also learned through trial and error that with the spray paint, you want to go in quick, short, horizontal bursts of paint. This causes fewer drippage and uses less paint, so your cans go farther. And here's how it's looking with the gray primer on it. The words are really popping nicely, and even though you won't really see it, it's sealed and safe. And next, I'll show you how to refinish the front of the kitchen sink, the part that people will see and you will use on a daily basis. Okay, so I have been sanding the sink. It's installed now. We've got the plumbing up and everything. Really, ideally, you totally refinish the sink before you put it up, but I didn't get it done before the people who came to help me put it up came. So I'm doing it now, and I'm using this Craftsman brand battery operated sander. Has a battery in it that you just pop out like this. Then you charge the battery and put it back in. I am starting the process of sanding with 60 grit paper, and then there are a couple of other products that I will use as well, but let's get to sanding. And here's how everything looked before I began the sanding process. You can see the paint splatters from doing the back side of the sink and a bunch of different rust spots that needed to be sanded up. And it all took a while to get it to a nice even coat. It was definitely worth it and kind of fun to use the electric sander on all of these little nooks and crannies. The sanding has multiple purposes. Firstly, it's to get all of the surface contaminants off, rust, paint from painting the other side of the sink, things like that. It's also to rough up the surface so that the paint that we're going to put on later sticks a little bit better. And here's how the sink is looking after sanding the front of it. I want to show you the products that I'm using for refinishing the rest of the sink. This is the big kit that we got from Bathworks. I got it off of Amazon. I'll have a link for you. It comes with several different kits, including this chip repair and also the recovering the main porcelain enamel. And then additionally, we got another kit that is this easy etch. Can't really read it super well, but it's a green liquid. And this I will be putting on after I repair the chips, but before putting on the porcelain enamel. It's a chemical sander. So this will get a lot of the grime off that I couldn't get with the electric sander. So those are the kits that I'm using to repair the sink. So now I'm going to go into the Bathworks kit and start there, starting with repairing chips like this one here. I'm going to mix these two substances together, a chip filler, and I believe this is their paint that they offer, and just follow the instructions here for how to do that. So that will be next. So here I am mixing up the chip filler portion of the kit, which is a cement-like substance, and the paint to mix together. This does dry fairly quickly, so you want to be able to use it as soon as you mix it up. This isn't something that you can mix the two things together and then walk away, because you'll just waste product that way. So I mixed up the substances, put it in any cracks that I needed to, and then sanded it down smooth so that it was as even with the rest of the sink as possible. Some of the areas did require more than one coat. Okay, so just finished patching everything. You can see there's no more hole in the sink here because I patched it. And now I'm going to sand the whole thing again with 120 grit sandpaper. That should be a quicker process because I'm not really getting large things like the paint marks off anymore. It's just a quick once over so that I can go in with this etching material. I'm going to put that all over the sink, and then it sits for 20 minutes. And then I will wipe it off of the sink. And after that, we get to the good part of the enamel painting. For this portion, I used a mixture of 120 grit sandpaper on my electric sander and just hand sanding with the paper at the bottom of the sink where the electric sander can't reach very well. And then I vacuumed the sink with my shop vac again to clean up all of the particles from sanding. Then I put painter's tape around the sink and in the drain spout before putting the etching chemical onto the sink. The etching chemical is really interesting. It's green. It has a bit of a strong smell, so I recommend wearing a mask and the gloves provided for this part. And it just sits on the sink for, I think it was 20 minutes. And then I wiped it off with a sponge and some water. we have made it to the final step. I wanted to go over what is in this kit and what the instructions say. So this is the Bathworks Roll-On Refinishing Kit. There were a couple of different kits inside this one. So now we're on the last part, which is the actual painting with the refinishing paint. So first I'm going to wipe it off with this cloth that is provided. And then I'm going to mix or use the primer. It says to put it in a paper towel and put it all over the sink. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to mix up the paint. There's two parts. There's this part A to the refinishing paint and a part B, which is the hardener that's in here. And I'm going to mix it up in this container that's provided. Stir it around, let it sit, and then paint it on with the foam roller that's in here. It says the paint's good for like 2 or 3 hours, and that if it needs a second coat, it can be applied immediately. I don't have to wait for it to dry. So that's what we are going to spend our evening doing, is the final part of refinishing this sink. And hopefully all of our hard work turns out really well. Painting the sink was a lot of fun. As you could see, my husband got to help with some of it. We both had a foam brush and were able to paint the edges of the sink, and then I used this foam roller that was provided for the main basin of the sink. The sink ended up taking 2 coats of paint. I had the extra paint, so I figured why not. And then I think I waited at least 24 hours before I actually used it, whatever the recommended time was. It was at least 24 hours though. And the sink did turn out absolutely beautifully. Here it is. I'm so happy with the finished result. She's beautiful, just as she was supposed to be. And I am loving using her every day. Next, I wanted to go over the installation part of the sink. Actually getting the sink into the proper spot was a feat. I don't have a whole lot of footage of that because it took a while, it took multiple tries, all of the plumbing took multiple tries, And we were kind of in a rush by that point, so I didn't record a whole lot of it, but I'll try to explain it as best I can. To get the sink to fit into the cabinetry properly, we had to cut into the Formica countertops. This is my father-in-law doing that. We put a large piece of paper over the back of the sink to cut out where the drain hole and other things that would jut out are to measure it. We had to recut it a few times. It wasn't totally exact, but this is how we did that using this skill saw here. All of the plumbing proved to be one of the most difficult challenges, as you can imagine, with such an old appliance here. So we had to do a lot of finagling and trying and retrying things. Starting with, we found this faucet, this wall mount faucet on Amazon, which I will have a link for you below. And we had to figure out some way to mount this onto the back of the sink. So we used a couple of different sizes of washers. We had to use these washers and get creative because we found that there was nothing to hold the faucet up because our water lines and shutoff valves and everything were at the bottom under the sink, and we had to just use flexible hoses to connect them. There was nothing connecting this faucet to the wall. So we had to use these washers and the pieces from the faucet to pull itself together so that the faucet would stay up. And then we also needed much longer hoses to connect to the water lines than what you could normally buy. So we ended up getting some dishwasher hose kits, which are over 5 feet long, which was kind of too long for what we needed, but we couldn't find anything in between. So we went with the really long stuff. And we used a piece from the dishwasher tube kit, this angled piece, to connect the faucet with the washers to the hose, and that worked pretty well. And then from there, we connected the hose pieces to the shutoff valves, which we had to install on the hot and cold water spouts. And to install the shutoff valves, we had to turn off the water, and we used a 3/8 inch to 1 inch PEX clamp tool. And then installing the plumbing for under the sink, the draining section, was a bit more typical, although still some finagling because the drain hole for this sink isn't standard anymore. So we got a rubber adapter with clamps, which you can see. It's a 1 1/4 inch PVC coupling, which connected to the drain at the top and the PVC pipe at the bottom. And then we got some kits for the PVC pipe, like a J-bend P-trap kit, 1 1/2 inch PVC pipe, and connected all of that using the kit's materials. And through this whole process, the absolute game changer was using Megalock thread sealant. We also used some regular Teflon tape, but that Megalock stuff made it so that nothing was leaking anymore, which was a big part of our problem, was trying to figure out how to get the water to stay in the pipes. And this stuff is magical. We haven't had any problems. It's been several months since we installed this sink and used these materials, and we haven't had any leaking. But seriously, the number one thing I can tell you is save yourself a lot of trips to Lowe's or your local hardware store by using this Megalock thread sealant. You don't need to try a bunch of different fittings. That stuff really worked to give the thread something to grab onto and actually have a tight seal. And after getting the sink in place, which took some effort because this thing is heavy, took all four of us, and finishing all of the repairs that it needed, the last final touch was putting caulk to seal the sink where it meets the countertops, that water wouldn't get in there. And here we have a beautiful, functioning antique kitchen sink that I cannot get enough of. I absolutely love this thing. Thank you for joining us today on Home with the Hudsons, where I showed you how to refinish your own antique sink. Let me know if you try it out. or if you have any questions. I might have missed some things, so feel free to let me know. And if nothing else, I hope this inspired you to try something that has seemed daunting for a long time, because it just might turn out wonderful. Join us next time on Home with the Hudsons, where we will continue to make this house a home.